From the 11 Alive studios, this is the Georgia Vote with Faith Jesse and Zach Merchant.
Hey, welcome to the Georgia Vote. It was pass-fail week at the Georgia Capitol Thursday. Crossover day, one of the busiest days of the year under the Gold Dome.
Now, the session, it is far from over, but we now have a good idea of what lawmakers have left to do before their final day on April 4th. Thursday was the last day for a bill to pass out of the chamber where it was introduced in order to be considered by the other chamber before the session ends in 4 weeks. Now, some notable legislation moving forward, the House passed a new round of tax refunds, including $250 to a single tax filer and $500 to married couples filing jointly. And the Senate passed a bill to discourage Georgia cities from requiring gun safes and lock boxes. But many bills fell short, including, and stop me if you have heard this one before, a sports betting bill. Also, a bill to withhold funding from any public school or university that promotes DEI programs. The sponsor of that bill pulled it before vote. Now, a reminder, because this is the first year of a 2-year session, lawmakers could bring back bills that failed to pass next year.
Well, on Wednesday, we sat down with State Senator Elena Parent, a Democrat from Atlanta, to discuss bills that she sponsored and supported. It's also Women's History Month, so I asked her about the impact of women under the Gold Dome. We start our conversation with a question about SB 50, a Medicaid expansion bill she sponsored, but it did not cross over.
Georgia is one of very few states that at this point has not accepted an expansion of Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. And that is simply hurting Georgians because Georgians already pay the taxes associated with that law, and the benefit is not coming to us. Governor Kemp rolled out a very limited expansion a year or two ago called Pathways. And I applaud him for trying to be innovative, but unfortunately it has just been an abysmal failure. The program has spent, over $30 million with at least 70% of that going to consultants and not actually to get folks health care. Only about 4,000 people have been able to sign up.
Would you say that there is a road to combating that this session and making sure that those Georgians who need that health care the most are getting it?
We're really facing resistance from the governor. The Republicans I work with realize that it's far past time that Georgia expanded Medicaid, that it's what makes the most financial sense for our state, and certainly it's the right thing to do for our citizens. But obviously there's only one governor in the state, and he certainly has a lot of power, and it is something that he's very firmly saying we will not do.
I know that you have had several healthcare initiatives that you continue to work on.
Right. Probably a lot of your viewers don't realize that over half of Georgia counties do not have an OBGYN. And giving birth in Georgia, being pregnant and giving birth in Georgia is a lot more dangerous than in most states. Our maternal mortality rate is still very high. That's directly tied into the lack of available preventive care. And some of the legislation that's made doctors, OBGYNs afraid of criminal penalties if a woman that they're trying to treat starts to hemorrhage or starts to have a miscarriage due to our 6-week abortion ban is also causing more OBGYNs to flee the state. So the problem is getting worse.
Do you think that women are adequately represented under the Gold Dome, and do you think that there's more work to be done?
I think there's a lot more work to be done to make sure that women, and honestly, by extension, children and family dynamics, right, caregiving, as it were, are better represented under the Gold Dome. We've got about 24% of the Senate that are women. Obviously, that's well under our population in the state, which is about 51%. That's really a big void. In terms of the folks running the show, a voice for women.
And my full interview with State Senator Parent is available right now. You can watch it by downloading our free streaming app to your TV. And we'll have more on Crossover Day and the Gold Dome coming up a bit later. Well, let's talk about this. Another big story we are following. Congresswoman Lucy McBath is dipping her toes into statewide politics. The Democrat is weighing a run for governor. She filed paperwork this past week to create an exploratory committee. She's a 3-term congresswoman representing districts in Metro Atlanta.
Georgia's former Senator Kelly Loeffler, she now has a new job leading the U.S. Small Business Administration. In a one-on-one interview earlier this week, the Republican discussed the future of the SBA and her views on newly announced tariffs President Trump implemented this week on Canada and Mexico. Will that increase inflation?
Well, there's no question we have challenges in our supply chain, which have driven inflation to date, in addition to the massive regulatory state during the Biden administration. So what we have seen during President Trump's first term, when he implemented tariffs, inflation was only 2.1%. And those are tariffs that the Biden administration largely kept in place. So we know that tariffs are an important tool to advancing America first, as opposed to bringing in foreign-made goods at the cost of American-made manufacturing.
But is the strategy short-term inflationary pain in exchange for long-term stabilizing of these trade relationships?
Well, I don't think that it has bared out that there will be short-term inflationary pain. As I mentioned, during the first Trump administration, inflation was 2.1% his entire 4 years. And so the focus needs to be on what is the right trade relationship and balance of trade that we should have in America to have our own economic resilience and stability with made in America products. And we've gotten away from that. I came out of business. We know what manufacturing does. It can create a blue-collar boom. It can create opportunity in communities that haven't had anything for far too long, where America has been hollowed out in order to send manufacturing to China, and we have to bring that back.
One of the top priorities in your memo as you took the helm of SBA, you said, was supporting DOGE, the so-called Department of Government Efficiency. Do you plan to lay off any SBA staffers now that you're in charge?
So coming into the SBA, I approach it as I did for nearly 30 years in business, as a business person, and basically bringing my common sense. How many people do we need to do the job that we're tasked with doing? And my number one mission is to restore the original mission of the SBA, the founding mission, which was to support small business formation and economic growth in this country. And so really looking at what does it take to drive the programs that we have and doing it efficiently. So I fully support the DOGE effort, been working closely with my DOGE partners, talking with Elon about this.
Just to be clear, to make sure anybody who's watching gets this straight on, are you saying that you do intend to institute layoffs or not?
I think there's a chance that we will be right-sizing the agency. There's certainly work underway right now to evaluate what programs make sense, what is our statutory remit, and what can be done to grow our economy without excessive costs to the taxpayers.
To see more of our interview, including Loeffler's views on a key legislative priority of Georgia Governor Brian Kemp's, look for our full interview streaming right now on 11 Alive Plus. You can download it on your TV and watch for free.
And still to come, we've heard from a Democratic state lawmaker. Next, an interview with State Republican Representative Deborah Silcox, where we discuss gun rights and abortion in Georgia. A busy week at the state capitol for longtime Republican State Representative Deborah Silcox. We spoke with the Sandy Springs Republican on Wednesday, and in the midst of Women's History Month, she shared a transformative moment she experienced as a woman under the Gold Dome. But we start with a question about Georgia's heartbeat law. I want to ask you about the concern in the medical community from some doctors who say that the law could restrict what they feel that they can do, this gray area that they may get in trouble if they do a certain procedure or not. Have you guys discussed that at all? Just kind of like the future of the bill now, and is there anything that can be done about that gray area?
You know, I have been approached by a number of OBs about that very issue, and I know that it is difficult for them to get guidance on this. They have been to the Attorney General, no guidance was provided, and I do think that we need to make changes in the law. I don't think Governor Kemp's prepared to make those changes at this time.
Do you see, is there a path for it potentially in the future?
I certainly hope so. I really do.
And you would support that?
Yes. Yes.
I wanted to ask you about HB 79, the bill that you sponsored with the tax credits for firearms if you have instructional type of safety, or the safe storage that has crossed over.
Right.
Can you talk to me more about this bill? We know that gun legislation was really top of mind at the beginning of session. It wasn't long after that horrific shooting that we saw at Appalachia High School. Where are gun bills right now? Obviously, yours that you sponsored has crossed over, but is there any confidence that this is going to change that landscape?
You know, we're hopeful that House Bill 79 is going to make a difference. It's a tough balancing act to balance the interest of everyone on both sides of the aisle to try to get consensus on this issue. And I will say that I think that House Bill 79 really does thread the needle in a great way, because it encourages positive, responsible behavior on behalf of those who do want to carry firearms. And I think it's important that we encourage good behavior. I think it's important that we not necessarily make it a mandate, because if you're going to criminalize it, then you may potentially take a parent out of the home where there's no supervision of children at all.
What changes have you seen since day one here until now when it comes to just the influence of women?
I've seen amazing changes because when I was at the University of Georgia, I actually did a internship in Washington, D.C. with Senator Sam Nunn when he was representing Georgia there. And then I did a legislative session here my senior year and worked with the insurance chairman, Joe T. Wood from Gainesville, Georgia. And I was sexually harassed when I was here as an intern. And I was delighted to come, and when I got elected, the pro tem Jan Jones actually passed. We have the strictest sexual harassment policy for legislators and lobbyists of any state in the country now. And we actually just had to renew our sexual harassment training that they make us, it's required that you do online. And I'm very proud of that. And I haven't had any issues since I was elected, but it's changed dramatically. It really has.
Really important topic, really important interview. And of course, we have so much to discuss in Georgia politics, and it's a good time to go to our political roundtable right now. Today, we have Fal Sabak, Assistant Vice President at McGuire Woods Consulting and former Executive Director of the Georgia House Democratic Caucus. And also joining us today, Republican strategist Jen Ryan. She is the founder and CEO of Final Draft Communications, and previously served as Vice Chancellor of Communications for the University System of Georgia and Deputy Chief of Staff of Communications for Governor Nathan Deal. Let's start with this. We're taping this on Friday. Crossover Day just happened. You guys had long days yesterday. What were the big surprises at Crossover Day for you?
There were a few big surprises. One of the surprises was a lot of things had already crossed over prior to Crossover Day, like the big ticket items such as tort reform. The bills that the Senate has been doing on gender identity. And so things had already crossed over. And the one thing that I think everybody was really waiting for was the sports betting bill.
Amen.
And sports betting, Jen, how many times have we had this conversation? This year, over many years?
7 years now.
What's happening with sports betting?
It is so disappointing to see yet another opportunity to fully fund Georgia pre-K sustainably at $100 million to $200 million annually pass us by. I think there were a lot of disappointed people, parents, families, and we were in the middle of Georgia pre-K enrollment and lottery period too.
But somebody must be not disappointed about this. I mean, you need a consensus to get it across. So what is, Fal, quickly while we're still on this point, we're moving quickly through this panel here, but what's the hang up? What's the case against sports gambling?
There are a lot of arguments against it, right? The number one being that everybody is accessible on their phone. So if you let kids get on there, they could be addicted. We've seen the stories online. Right. The other part is it's the math of the chamber. And so when you have 80 Democrats on one side, 100 Republicans on the other side.
Doing the math, Jim.
Yeah, it took me a minute. We had long nights. But trying to build that coalition amongst those two parties to figure out what can they each agree with? Where will the money go? Right. That's in and of itself a challenge.
And I will say that this year is the closest they've ever come. You know, it's passed the Senate the last 3 to 4 years. This year, it passed House Committee, I think, at the most support it had ever had, upwards of 100 signers. So surprising.
I want to ask you guys about the kind of camaraderie, the coalitions between across the aisle, but also kind of this Democratic divide. And I want to point out one bill in particular, that's SB 185. That was a bill dealing with reassignment surgeries and hormone replacements for inmates in the transgender community. You saw 4 Democrats vote along with Republicans. Senator Elena Parent was one of those who we spoke with, Sonia Halpern, Ed Harbinson, and Freddie Powell Sims. The rest of them either voted no or didn't vote at all. Is this an indication of the divide that we are seeing in the Democratic Party, Val?
I don't think it's an indication of the divide. Look, I think that the Democratic Party, it's a big tent party. I think folks are trying to figure out kind of where their districts are, what is the message to go ahead and fight against the Trump administration. So I think it's folks are trying to kind of figure out where they are, how can they move forward, and then how can we continue to, build the coalition and build up our power.
Okay.
Jen?
I would argue that the Republicans have built a bigger tent in order to encompass 4 really prominent, long-serving, very well-respected legislators. And I think that this is not just the mood of the country, but probably people not just voting their district, but maybe voting their morals.
I would think so. And I mean, that's what we saw even on the national level. I know we have 30 seconds left and we want to talk about McBath.
Very quickly here, one sentence answer to each of you. Representative Lucy McBath has not formally announced that she's running for governor. She's spun up this exploratory committee. Does this mean she's running, Val?
It never means that she's running until she actually starts raising money. And so I think that this is a serious first step. I think it is an indicator that she is seriously considering taking the jump. I'm
just going to cut in. We're running really short here. Jen, one word to you. Do you agree with Val?
I do. Yes, she is.
That was great. That was one word. That was perfect.
Short panel today.
Thank you both so much. As always, so good to have you. Georgia Vote will be right back after this.
You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having
I'm not
cards.
playing cards.
Right now, you don't.
You're
playing cards.
Mr. President.
You're playing cards.
Serious.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III.
Well, the war in Ukraine is now 3 years old with a very uncertain future, especially after that explosive meeting about a week ago between President Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky.
Days after that exchange, I talked with Congressman Brian Jack. He is a Republican from Georgia's 3rd District about that Oval Office dust-up and what he thinks should come next. What's your stance on the United States' position regarding the war in Ukraine? What should the United States be doing?
Well, I think one of the things we saw on display on Friday, and I had a chance as a staffer to sit on some of the bilateral meetings when I worked in the White House in the first Trump term, it was a rare display of a foreign leader disrespecting the Vice President of the United States by talking over him and not allowing him to make his points within the Oval Office. And I think one of the things that discouraged a lot of people is they're hoping to see the president of Ukraine want peace. And I think that's what I saw the National Security Advisor say today, that if and the president said this on Friday, if the president of Ukraine wants peace, he should come back to the White House and talk. But they're looking for signs of that. And I think everyone across our congressional district, across our state, wants to see us move toward peace, not just in Ukraine, but across the world.
I think President Zelensky, and he has said this in so many words, I think he would also say that if this war is going to be ended through negotiation, through a treaty, that the Ukrainians and the Ukrainian government would want that ending with some guarantees of protection of Ukrainian sovereignty without rewarding Russia's aggression, because they did start the war.
And I'd be curious to see what conversations are being had behind closed doors there as it relates to what specific guarantees for which he's asking. But I think it returns to the president's point, which he made very publicly in the Oval Office on Friday, is he says, if you want peace, you can come here and talk. If you don't want peace, then I don't know what we're going to do. And I think that the President Zelensky's comments after that meeting suggests that he may want to restart conversations. So we'll see how that goes. I will say, as it relates to, again, federal government spending, it's one of the things that I know a lot of people across our congressional district and frankly the state of Georgia are discouraged by is what they view to be taxpayer dollars. We're all paying our taxes April 15th. They're discouraged about those taxes going to causes that they don't support here at home.
And coming up next, our voice of the voter is a Ukrainian American who calls Georgia home. Her perspective on the war is next. Three years in, and the war in Ukraine continues to have global impact, including right here in Georgia. Woodstock resident Anna Skudarnova knows firsthand. She's a Ukrainian American, and she shares her family's story in her own words in this week's Voice of the Voter.
I was born in the States, but my parents are from Ukraine, and it was really important to them that while we love this country, we grew up in this country, we also wanted to visit our relatives and family in Kyiv every summer. So these photos are actually from 2019.
I see your happiness when you look at these photos. It's also been a really challenging 3 years for Ukraine too, right?
Yes, I mean, all my close relatives live in Kyiv, in the capital, and so they hear when, drone strikes happen. It is very difficult to wake up with that reality every morning, trying to check in on them. How did their night go? It has been very difficult, and it feels like some of what's portrayed in these pictures has been stolen from us a bit.
How's your extended family doing? Are they okay?
They're okay today, but we never know what tomorrow will bring.
When you look around, what worries you the most?
I think for me, it definitely is the issue of global security and human dignity. And those really go for me hand in hand, human dignity from the time of conception to natural death, but also the understanding that that human dignity in my Christian worldview extends beyond the borders of this country. And so what does that mean? How do we continue to stand for human dignity worldwide, knowing that that's also what's best for our country?
What would be your message to America's political leaders right now?
Well, I'm Ukrainian American, and so my plea would be to put America first, with the understanding that that means standing with our allies, understanding that Ukraine is standing between tyranny and freedom, our own freedom, right? Because Russia is a common enemy, quite frankly. I know that because I also speak Russian fluently, and I understand what they say about us, and it's very troubling. So my message would be stand for America by standing with Ukraine.
We always end with this. What are you most optimistic about?
Well, sometimes it can feel like I'm only 24 years old and I wake up to kind of a dark world, both with where my family lives in Ukraine and even right now in the United States. But I remind myself that light shines brighter in the dark, and I see that through the wonderful people on both continents that continue to stand for truth, to stand for what's right, to show Christ's love to people around them. Certainly, that's what gives me hope, and it reminds me that my light can shine brighter in the dark.
Well, thanks for watching us today.
We appreciate it. We hope to see you back here next Sunday at 11 for another edition of the Georgia Vote.